We are live, folks. Here it is ProphetFear with the one and only gravity training over there. And today we're going to
Um,
talk about some subjects from a bigger channel, natural hypertrophy, starting from discussing the efficacy and importance of deloading, discussing the execution of certain lifts, example given, stiff leg deadlift. Third, discussing, what was it? Range of motion? Yes, range of motion. And finally, discussing main gaining, aka maintaining to recomposition, or the rescinded, revised definition that people give, really, really slow surpluses. Yes, we'll probably talk in that order. So, any initial comments?
yeah, on the topic of loading, this is going to be in the context of bodybuilding and hypertrophy training. It's going to be in the context of powerlifting, because people will be quick to jump to say that deloading is a very powerlifting specific, but we'll get into that. It's going to be in the context of bodybuilding. And we're also going to say that, again, we made this clear in the community post. This isn't a roast video. It's going to be very informative and have balance. We're going to use two main kinds of evidence, which is going to be the literature, the science, if you like, and the notes and advice from actual coaches.
Yes.
All into that.
Did you have any more to
But,
say?
no, nothing to add there.
I wanted to say I would like to record for the audience the actual videos of him discussing deloads, and you will be able to hear it from your end. I'll be able to see it. The audience will be able to see it, but you'll be able to hear it, and we'll go, step by step. What is in the video? We're not mischaracterizing, straw manning, anything like that. We're addressing legitimate points, legitimate counterpoints. Yes, yes, that's what we're doing. So I will start that video right now, and we will be able to hear it. And then I'll pause it, and we'll talk about what he says, and we'll see, agree, disagree, and then we'll probably refer to other videos and experts, coaches, whatever, and then we'll go from there. Yes, so I will start that video now.
Hello YouTube, today I'm going to talk to you about deloads, and I think I'm going to be offering a point of view that is slightly different than what you usually hear on YouTube Fitness, because I'm going to talk about deloads from a bodybuilding standpoint. So just as an introduction, there are multiple ways people deload, and in my opinion there are objectively good and bad ways to do so. For me, taking a week off or even 3 or 4 days off when you don't lift at all is not a good deload. It might potentially be something that strength athletes are going to use before a big competition where they're going to recharge for 2 days beforehand with no lifting. But for bodybuilders, it just does not apply. You don't need to do that.
Okay, now we can talk. What do you think about that?
Well, as we said, we opened the video. We don't want to strawman his argument. So I'd hope to say that he doesn't go on to say deload for body a dealer for bodybuilders should be to reduce volume, because if he goes on for just for 1 week, if he goes on to say that, that would be a more fair and applicable deload. However, I've seen the video in full. He says that you should actually deload, which has problems. I can I can pull evidence to show why you should deload. But what do you think?
I would say that he hasn't discussed why. He just says his opinion up front. We'll get into the details of the whys, but before we do that, as a prelude, 1 second, real quick, to show us. There we are. Yeah, so I wanted to say we already have our counter argument ready. We're gonna say, without going into the details up front, I would say deloads are objectively better, even hypothetically. You don't take deloads and progress over time. If you took deloads, you would probably progress no less and probably progress more. We'll talk about the whys. That's just the abstract of my opinion. And I think you've spoken about your opinion, unless you want to add something further.
There.
No? Okay. We will go back to him then.
Unless you have an injury that you're nursing, and in which case maybe you should not be lifting anything, but even in most cases, in my opinion, it's always better to move and get some blood flowing. The only exceptions would be a thing that tore.
Real quick, without discussing that, I agree that when you deload, you should move. When you deload, people assume that's doing nothing. That's not how we see deloads. That's not how many people see deloads. Many people still actually lift heavy on deloads, relatively. Yes, you agree? Yeah.
As I left, usually I cut volume. I use the same weight and cut volume drastically.
Yes, and you're still moving. You're still active. Deloading,
Yeah.
to deload or to recover faster, you want to move. The less you move, the slower you recover. That's the misconception. People think moving less helps you recover more. No, moving more recovers you more. That's an important takeaway from this podcast, I think. And let me continue back to him.
Like a tendon, in which case, yes, you're just going to not train, but it's not a deload. So the objectively better way to deload for me would be to go in the gym and do the lifts that you usually do, but you're going to do them with low intensity and low volume to reduce your tonnage and artificially make the training much easier so that it's less taxing, but you still get some blood flowing, and more importantly, you train the movement patterns so that you don't have to enter a phase of relearning them when you get back to the gym. That's something that a lot of powerlifters do. But I'm not a powerlifter, and in my opinion, as a bodybuilder, this is still a subpar way to approach things for multiple reasons. The first one being, why do you deload? You deload because you have one characteristic that you want to recharge so that you can show your max potential. What is that characteristic? Strength. Bodybuilders don't.
I'm gonna stop him right there and actually found. There we are. The element or quality that you're trying to recharge as a bodybuilder when you take a deload isn't strength per se. It's fitness slash performance. It's performance. Performance as in the act of performing in the gym. You see, when you perform hypertrophy training, hypertrophy is a state of being. Hypertrophy is not you doing anything. Hypertrophy is elicited by performance in the gym. And that can be, everybody knows how. It's moving weights up and down. That's performance. And well, that's actually the act of lifting weight. Performance is how well you move those weights up and down comparatively to what you did before. And that's performance. And actually, I have created, which you've seen, on paper, a demonstration of this performance and fitness and fatigue, which we will get to. Do you have any comments about what has been said so far?
It missed the wider picture of why to deload. To express strength is not the only factor. It can be a factor, but it's not the only factor. It can also be to prevent injury. Can also be to prevent psychological psychological fatigue, and enhance your immune system, because after 4 to 9 weeks of intense training, your immune system can go in the gutter a lot. Generally, just to manage your inflammation, your cortisol, how you feel, how you sleep at night. There's lots of things. There's lots of reasons physiologically to deload, and to just simply say we're only deloading to gain strength, to express strength. I'm not a powerlifter, so it doesn't have any application to me. It's missing the wider picture.
Yes, you have to understand that strength isn't absolute strength. Strength is a continuum of strength values, from absolute strength to strength endurance to endurance strength. And when you're doing sets of 8, 10, that will be considered endurance strength. You can't separate you can't separate the quality of strength. We're not talking about peaking absolute strength. We're talking about strength as in performing, lifting a weight up and down, and that's performance. Yeah, so yeah, for bodybuilders, strength is important, because if they didn't have strength in the sense of endurance strength, they would not be able to just demonstrate or to progress, because without strength, you need strength to pick a weight up and down. It's impossible to separate that from bodybuilding. No more. You want to continue now?
Yeah.
Don't care about strength. We're not strength athletes. So why are you trying to recharge your strength? It makes no sense. The second thing is that by doing that method, you are shooting yourself in the foot, because you're lowering your tonnage. And you might argue that you are lowering your tonnage because it's going to help you recover, so that in the future, after the deload, you're rested and you can get more tonnage in. And I would say to that if you need to have 3 or 4 days off every 2 months to be able to keep progressing, your programming is wrong. Either intensity
I'm gonna bring it back. Okay, we're back. So he's saying, I just wanted to mention this little point. It's not even the main point, but he said every 2 to 3 months you take 3 or 4 days off. Funny enough, every 7th week I take 9 days off. Just putting that out there. Not 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 days. I did that last meso, and I was cutting, and I was in a rush to finish cutting. That's not normal. That's too short of a deload for myself. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, only speaking anecdotally, obviously this is just personal experience, but I incidentally take every 7th week off. I train hard for 6 weeks. 7th is off. I dramatically feel better during that 7th week. Things such as maybe an achy knee tendon, or maybe an achy shoulder, not an injury per se, but early warning signs may sometimes come up. Or in a ideal situation, I may feel like I never need it. I need the deload week, which is fine. Like last deload week, that was fine. I felt fine going into the week, but all the same, every 7th week would be probably a good aim for. Yeah, that's pretty. I've found 7 weeks is great.
And I'm going to now take us to another video by Greg Nuckols and Eric Trexler discussing deloads. You know what I'm talking about. And this is going to address the first claim that you are quote unquote shooting yourself in the foot. Now, we're going to need an explanation for that, but I'm going to show the video, and then they'll speak for us, and then we'll speak further. So bear with us.
I don't think it's like quote unquote optimal theoretically to just take time completely off of training. But at the same time, again, it's like, and I think it depends on like how frequently you're doing it. So for example, if you're doing a program where you do 3 weeks of training and then deload on the 4th week, so like a 5-3-1-esque setup, you probably don't want to take a quarter of your total training time completely off of training.
Yeah.
That's probably not ideal. But, you know, if you have a setup like that and you do like a more typical deload where, you know, you drop volume and intensity a little bit. And so it's basically like you have 3 hard weeks and 1 easy week. And you do that for a few months. And then on the 5th month, you're like, you know what? I'm feeling kind of burned out. I've been seeing way too much of the inside of a gym. I just want to take this week off. That's fine. You know, like taking a week off of training every 4 months, 6 months, whatever, like that's not going to be the end of the world. So unless you're doing that like all the time, I think it's probably fine. Again, it's probably not like the best thing to do. It's not theoretically optimal, but as long as you're not taking like a week off every month, you're probably going to be okay.
Do you recall seeing any research? I could have sworn I saw at least one paper like this, but it was with fairly untrained people, but they used like pretty periodic weeks off. Have you ever seen that research where they compared continuous training versus people who just like trained for a little bit of time and then just stayed away from the gym, and it was kind of like an intermittent thing like that?
Yeah, so there are actually a couple studies on that. The lead author for both of them is Aga Sawara. And the way that those studies worked is essentially one group would just train continuously and the other group would train 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And those 3 weeks off were just 3 weeks off. And what they found is over a pretty reasonable length of time. I want to say one of the studies ran 15 weeks and the other maybe ran 21 weeks or something like that. The group taking periodic time off ended up having similar strength gains and similar hypertrophy to the group training continuously. One thing to note is those studies were on untrained lifters. So, you know, I don't think it's probably ideal to take a third of your time completely off training if you're 10 years into the game and still trying to make progress. But I do think it probably illustrates that time completely off isn't as deleterious as a lot of people think it will be.
Especially when you're talking a 1 week duration versus 3. I mean, 3 weeks off is a significant amount of time off.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a week, it's fine. I think lifting becomes such a large part of people's identities that like taking a week out of the gym completely is almost like a threat to identity to a lot of people. And so like they want to believe they're going to lose all of their gains just so they can justify always going to the gym.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, like, and so, I mean, like talking to clients, they'll be like, hey, I'm going on vacation. I'm not sure that I'll be able to find like a good gym near the hotel. Like, what should I do with my training? I'm like, dude, like I can write you some workouts that you can do on your vacation, but you're on vacation. Like, just take time off. And they're like, oh, I can do that? I'm like, yes, you can do that. Come on. Like, you take 2 weeks off a year. That's not going to fuck you up.
Yeah.
So yeah, like probably not theoretically optimal, but as long as you're not taking like a quarter of your time completely off of training by doing a complete unload once, like 1 week out of every month, it's probably fine. And even if you did do that, that would probably be fine as well. We've talked about John Cole on the podcast before. I'm pretty sure. I think we've talked about him on here.
I think so.
So like the way he trained is he worked out once per week. Those workouts were like 6 to 8 hours long, but he just trained essentially all day every Saturday and not at all Sunday through Friday. So I mean, one could conceptualize that as a 6-day deload.
He took a week off every week.
That's what he did. He took of however many hours are in the week, he took that number of hours minus 6 off between sessions, you know?
Yeah.
And he was fine. So yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to worry all that much about missing a week of training every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, my approach to deloads is fairly similar. I would add one additional thing. So you talked about, you could do your proactive deloads that are kind of scheduled, into the program day one. You've also got your reactive deloads where you're like, okay, I can sense that it's probably time. I use something that I think you could call a prospective deload. Okay, and what I mean by that is I do enjoy traveling, and I don't enjoy training while traveling, because usually my workouts, even if I try to do them, they tend to suck, and they take away from time. Like, if I'm in London, I don't necessarily want to spend a significant portion of that in a gym, unless it's like a fitness trip where I'm working out with fitness people. Then that's like a social thing more than a training thing. But like if I'm going somewhere to like see the sights, I don't necessarily want to spend a huge percentage of that trip in a gym. I want to go see the sights.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what I'll do is, if I see that I've got those travel dates in my calendar, I will program my training to basically crescendo up into that, such that by the time I get to that trip, I really need a week off. So I'll almost like intentionally plan to overreach leaning into that trip. So, if you're someone who gets a little bit stressed out about taking a week off, or you want to make sure that, a week off isn't necessarily optimal, but how do I make it less suboptimal? That's one thing that I've done in the past, especially when I was really ramping up my training. Like, now I just don't train ever because I suck. But back then, that was a strategy I used that I actually liked a lot, because like it essentially justified taking a week off. I've also done that in the past if I knew that I had a really crazy week where I was like, oh, that week has just deadlines all over it.
Mm-hmm.
I probably shouldn't spend 8 hours in a gym that week.
Yeah, so some takeaways from that video include people were taking 3 weeks off of training in at least one study, making no significant, not causing a significant decrease in performance from people who trained continuously, non-stop, no deloads. And yeah, as people are going to say, it's an exercise to a science study. Those are mediocre, limited. I've even made a video saying that, like, within the last week, about active volume as a predominant driver of hypertrophy, which you guys can see. Yes, I know. Here's the thing, though. This claim that has been made isn't necessarily, taking 3 weeks off is suboptimal. That it's actually taking 3 weeks off. Like, I forgot how many weeks, but like after a few weeks, you take it off. But now, the claim being made is that if you take like 3 or 4 days off every 2 to 3 months, that's going to have a deleterious effect on your gains in the long term. I don't necessarily see eye to eye with that. The study doesn't see eye to eye with that. Many coaches don't see eye to eye with that. We'll probably get into that more. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I think to bring it background to hypertrophy training, because obviously those guys from Bob Medicine, they're very powerlifting focused. Again, just to reiterate, the study was specific to hypertrophy, all the same, as well as strength. I have another study here that I'll leave in the description. It's a peer-reviewed journal, and the conclusion was that the group that took a deal week, and so we've got a group that took a train continuously for 15 weeks, deload week train for 6 weeks, and then stopped for 3 weeks. Okay. So, and then in the 3-week detraining period, there was an increase in muscle mass, and the retraining was similar to those observed after the initial training. And the improvements in 1RM in both groups were very similar, and all hypertrophy was maintained in both groups. Now, this isn't to say that we recommend taking 3 weeks off after every 6 weeks. Always some muscle memory going on there where they regain muscle. Rather, it is probably optimal to only take off 1 week of deloading, unless you really need it. I'm just going to paste that study in the to you, Prophet, so you can give it in the description or something. I'll just send it over to you. Also for deloading, I also sent you a video by John Meadows actually, and he gives his perspective on deloads. how he says how his clients who really need it, they can take between 7 and 9 days off on their deload week. Him himself, as he is an advanced lifter, he's a very strong, was a strong, knowledgeable coach. Rest in peace. He himself was a big advocate of deloading. I don't know if you want to show that video now, Prophet, but I think it's worth a look. Obviously, it brings in some more school application, because obviously we want a balance between science here, and obviously that was a talk from Sue about medicine, but there's also a very big emphasis here in this video by John, who has some very practical experience as well.
Some things there. First, I want to say, just to be clear here, the audience of natural hypertrophy isn't intermediate or advanced lifters predominantly. It's actually teenagers and people in their early 20s. These are by and large novice lifters who fit the bill closer to those untrained or lowly trained people in that study, and those other studies show that continuous training versus deloading has no significant difference. So for that population, these studies are more relevant. Yes. So that's something to take away before anyone shifts the goalpost to, well, people who lift weights, they can't take that much time off, but the majority of the audiences of all YouTube channels, most YouTube channels are untrained, not very trained, or they've only been lifting for 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever years, and they haven't been doing it consistently or optimally or close to optimally. No one does it optimally, but they are not part of this advanced demographic, intermediate demographic. That's just the truth of it. And another point you wanted to bring up, John Meadows. Yes, the first point. That's actually stronger by science, not barbell medicine. We'll get to those guys later, but yes, it's stronger by science. And they were talking about strength and hypertrophy. And here's an important part about deloads and detraining. Physiologically, the human body, when you detrain, the first quality that goes is endurance and work capacity. That's the first quality that goes. It doesn't take very long to start dropping. And the second quality that goes is neurological adaptations, motor learning, especially with complex movements like squats. And squats are pretty complex. And then hypertrophy, it's a very long-lasting quality, and in the span of a week, if you're eating at caloric maintenance or surplus, you're not losing any detectable hypertrophy. And the worst thing that happens is the intracellular fluids, like, they go away. The sarcomere and the contractile tissue usually stays, and it's longer lasting than the sarcoplasm and this and that. So that stuff comes back really quickly as well, including on cuts, but we'll get to that later. And then finally, John Meadows. This is a good point, because people are going to say, oh, these are nerds. They're just talking about studies. They don't know real application. Well, I'll look at that video you sent about John Meadows. How long is it? The duration of it?
4 minutes. You
You
don't have to use the whole video. You don't even have to use the whole video. Just 40 seconds in is when he says the whys of deloading.
Even better. Yes, I will show it now.
How do you do it? When is the right time to deload, and how do you do it? It's a little different in bodybuilding. Okay, so first of all, I'm no expert in strength or powerlifting. And most of the really good work that I've seen on this subject was in strength athletes. They had blocks where they would gradually increase their intensity, and then maybe it's 4 weeks, maybe it's 6 weeks, maybe it's 8 weeks. And then there would be a period where they pull back on the weights and the intensity. Very, very good stuff. Bodybuilding is a little bit different though. Bodybuilding is very different. And I'm going to share my opinion with you on deloading. So first of all, when do you deload? I am of the belief that this should be very instinctual. And you should be looking for cues on when your body's kind of had enough. If I have a client and he is just just nailing everything. He's getting stronger, he's getting bigger, or she's doing more reps, or she's feeling awesome. I don't care if it's been 4 weeks on the training program or 8 weeks or 12 weeks. I'm going to tell him or her to keep going. I mean, when you're in a groove in bodybuilding, you keep going. You don't slow down. Now, there will come a point, because you can't train really hard forever. You just can't. There will come a point when the weights will start feeling heavier. The pump will start going away. You'll start feeling a little tired, a little more lethargic. You won't be sleeping as well. You won't be as excited to go to the gym. And this won't be a daily thing. It won't be just for one day. It'll be a couple days, and you notice it for a week, and something just seems off. You're eating good. It's not your diet. That's your body telling you, hey, maybe I need to back off a little bit. So I try to listen to my body for those cues. The weakness, you're losing strength, you're losing explosiveness. That's your body kind of saying, hey man, time out, take a step back. Because remember, in bodybuilding, it's always you take a step back, you take 2 forward. You take a step back, you take 2 forward. Okay, so now we know how to deload. So how do you deload?
Yes, I think that's as far as we need to go with that video. Point made, right? You see the contrast. This is not a strength athlete. This is not a power lifter or anything like that. But even he prescribes deloads for his clients. Even he prescribes deloads for just when you train hard. He said it himself. That when you train hard, you accrue fatigue and you can't sustain this forever. Now, on the other hand, if you train like many bodybuilders or people in gyms, period, they don't train hard ever, or not often. Like maybe they do 1 set per month. That can be an exertion, like that can be considered an exertion of high effort. And then most of the time they're training like 10 RIR, stuff like that. This is not what we're advocating. We're advocating the opposite. We're advocating you get progressively closer to failure. And also, getting closer to failure progressively increases fatigue on a set-by-set basis. As you get closer to failure, fatigue rises exponentially. Like it's not that much at 5 or 4 IR, but as you get to 3, 2, 1, 0, it starts doing that per set, especially on multi-joint complex movements like bench presses, on heavy ass rows with like one hand going all the way, pull ups, 0 IR. I don't know anyone who does 0 IR squats and deadlifts. I actually do know 0 IR deadlifts will mess your shit up. You will be shell shocked the next day. Even that day, you'll be shell shocked. And for the entire week, your performance and your quality of life will tank. That's fatigue. That's systemic fatigue. That's why you deload. When that happens, when you fuck up like that, okay, you have no choice. But I feel like we should go back to natural hypertrophy's videos before I get to the other stuff. Just so like this is the first part. That yes, even bodybuilders deload. Yes, deloading doesn't have a significant detrimental effect on gains in the medium term, long term, or anything like that. So, you have anything to say?
No, nothing off the top of my head. I'm glad that John did cover, like I say, the remarks about mental fatigue and gaining on the immune system. He didn't quite touch on the injury side. I think we could go into the injury side, or maybe I could do that, but that's.
I mean, I have screenshots also that we could go through, but I want to go back and let natural hypertrophy speak. We've moved away for a bit. Let's let him talk again. It's only like an 8-minute video from him. We should like get to the end of it at least, and that's what I will do now.
Either you're doing something wrong with intensity or volume, but it should not put you in a hole so that you need days to recover from it. The frequency you assign to your training between days and between body parts and the window of time you give yourself for the muscle fibers to recover should be enough. Always. You shouldn't need a joker of 2 days to recover from something. If you do that, in my opinion, it's either that you messed up and therefore it's sort of an emergency response to let your body rest, or if it's actually something that's implemented within your program and it is something that is going to be happening on a schedule, you're hurting your gains. That's my opinion. You should really be focusing on volume and intensity manipulation instead of having that crush of the deload. I personally never deload. The only time I rest is basically the days I give myself in between body part splits so that the muscle can recover, and Sundays. I have one day where I just say, this is a day where I do nothing, I let the body fully recover, I don't even do band work. It's just for me and my family a day off. And this is more of a mental recharge, to be fair, than a physical one. It makes me crave training more so that I can enter the next cycle of 6 days with a lot of energy and fire because I cannot wait to train again. I could do without. I used to do that without.
I think, do you have any interjections? I think I heard you.
Is it so it doesn't go off on a tangent? I think it says you should be manipulating intensity and volume. Well, first of all, we know that natural hypertrophy likes to train to failure on almost every set. He says that, blah de blah. These studies that say 2 RAR is useless, blah de blah de blah.
No, to be honest though, he said his definition of failure is going to not to failure, not hitting failure, but quote unquote going to failure, which is different in the sense he does a rep that's 0 RIR, but he doesn't hit -1 RIR, which is hitting failure. He's at failure, but he didn't go to failure. I believe that's what he says, yes.
I understand. That's my definition. To me, zero RAR is actually failure. But yeah, rolling with that.
I agree.
And in the context of his training templates, which are, in my opinion, actually very low volume, I think if he ups the effective dose of volume, wouldn't be mentioning this kind of thought process of saying that deloading is necessary and you should be instead placing your intensity and volume. Well, in his case, there isn't much volume to actually manipulate. I'm not actually sure. I think maybe he's never deloading because he's never up there at the upper threshold of effective volume. Say, looking at some of his, as they say, his gentleman split, for example, it is actually rather low volume, in my opinion. We're talking like sub 10 sets for some muscles per week. And I think that's kind of summed up as well. It says I need some mental rejuvenation before the next 6 days of my next 6 day cycle. There were his words in that video just then. Well, cycle isn't usually 6 days. Is that, say, if it was 6 days, that would mean that every set is 2 failure. I can't help but wonder if he's never deloading, maybe because he's on the low volume end, the very low volume end of training. Like I say, if he was pushing up to higher, more effective volumes, then he may need a deload, and that's fine because, as we said, it's fine to have a deload. There's no muscle loss. There's only benefit, and there's no loss, and there's probably some benefit basically. So if he was to add some more volume, in our definition of volume, not just more tonnage, as he likes to discuss tonnage, which is his own separate problem because he relies only on tonnage. I think that he may require a deload. So it's more a critique. This is my problem. This is going off on tangent of his definition of tonnage, his definition of deloads and intensity, and all these different tangents. But if he was up his volume to have more effective volume and thus need a deload, that probably would be more optimal than always training at these very low volumes, which are usually 0 RAR. What do you think about that?
I think that's a very honest and legitimate assessment of things, but I have a devil's advocate opinion. Now, nobody knows exactly what everybody does, but I'm just going to say it out loud. I probably do less volume than gravity training. I probably do less volume than natural hypertrophy, almost certainly. And in fact, it's actually comically low, the types of volumes that I do. Real quick second. I'm going to bring up the the Fit Notes app. And I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna yeah. So now I'm recording again. So I have a sequence of workouts from actually hold on. Let me start even sooner than that. So here we are. I have a sequence of workouts from from March to April or whatever. So this is referring to stiff leg deadlifts. You can see it in your own Discord, but I'll narrate it. So on the first week, I start with 2 sets of stiff leg deadlifts with 1 set of leg curls. And then on the second set, this is bulking. This is not cutting. On cutting, you'll see what I do for cutting. For bulking, I do 3 sets on the second week. But then here's the second point. This is actually the progression scheme. As you can see, let's talk about the progression scheme as it relates to deloading. Friday, March 5th is week 1, day 1 for legs, right? So I walk in, I do an easy set, 245 by 12, it's nothing. And second set, also easy, 245 by 8. And then next week I come in, I do 255 by 12 again, but then I add another set. I also improve my reps on my second set, and then on my third set, it doesn't matter. It's my third set. It can have any value because it's the first time I did a third set in the meso. And then third week, I actually regress. And is this signs of overreaching? Is my programming volume and intensity wrong? Well, we'll see. I only get 9 for 265, and then week at April or March 26th, I'm at 265 by 12. So it turns out I didn't regress. It's just that, especially when you're training sub-maximally and you're not adapted yet, your performance hasn't caught up yet. So it could be, yes. So I rapidly shift back up to 12 with 265. And then the next week, I regress 1 rep as I add 5 pounds on April 2nd. But then on April 9th, I'm at 275 by 12. This is double progression. This is because at this point, I've decreased my RIR. I've increased my proximity to failure. Yes. And that's causing me to be able to increase reps and weight at the same time. And also to basically maintain my subsequent sets, because exertion is, for every set, I have a similar exertion level per day, per day of the week per meso, right? And then we go into the future. As you can see, if you look, I took a deload. Yes, a deload. And then on my first day back on Friday, I'm at 285 by 9. Oh, am I something bad happened? Did the deload set me back? Well, next week I'm at 290 for 10. Again, double progression. And then the day after that, or the week after that, my bad. Also, 295 by 10. Also note that on the first 2 weeks, I do 2 sets. This comes back to the point. I do very low volumes for my lower body. Like, during my deloads, I do 6 sets for hamstrings for 7 weeks straight. So you mentioned that natural hypertrophy does very low volumes and he trains to failure a lot, and that might be why he doesn't need to deload. Well, I probably train lower volumes, also close to failure on each of my sets, but not to failure. Generally like 3 or 2 most of the time, and then eventually 1 and 0. Even I need a deload after 6 or 7 weeks, even with such low volumes. And then here's an example of me having a reactive deload. Something happened. I was lifting too heavy, because lifting heavy intensity as in percentage of 1 rep max causes you to overreach faster, especially as you're adding volumes. And this is not because of the stiff leg deadlifts. Other lifts were very heavy and it was causing me to overreach. And I did a reactive deload. So that was the end of that meso. And then we go back to this meso. Yes, and then, well, here we are. May 18th. So a week deload after, and we're at 305 for 9, and then 305 for 7. The week after that, we're at 315 for 9, 315 for 6. Then we're June 4th, we're at 320 for 8, 320 for 6. June 11th, 325 for 8, 6, 5. And then the week after that, June 11th or June 18th, 330 for 8, 330 for 6, 330 for 5. And then in the final week, I hit 0 IR, could not hit the 8th rep. I actually got it to lockout, but I couldn't extend my hips, and there's a video that I could show. Basically, you could compare. At 335 by 7, I've hit my asymptote for the mesocycle. That's my asymptote. I could either try to grind at the wall. I could either try to hit 335 for 8 again. I could try to go to 340 for 7, or I could just deload because I know I've overreached. My other sets are good, but I can see that I cannot sustain this linear progression. If you go back, it started at 245 for 12, and then after, I don't know, two months or whatever, or 3 months, yes, 3 months. It's basically at 3.5 months, 4 months, whatever. It's at 335 for 7. That's linear, both linear progression and linear periodization at the same time. As the intensity goes up, reps go down. But here's the thing. If I never took deloads, how in the hell would I have gotten 245 for 12 to 335 for 7? You see, I would have been in a constant state of fatigue, and I already do low volumes. I would have been flatlined basically at 275 or 285 or whatever, and that's an example of deloads facilitating progression. Deloads are for recharging you for another meso. That's what they're for. They're not for, oh, I'm tired this week, so you know what, like I'm just gonna not do anything. No, they're because you hit an asymptote, your progression is, as you saw, it's like this, and as you reach your peak, you hit an asymptote, and your progression flatlines. 335 for 7 is equal to 330 for 8, and then if I keep hitting the wall with my head, it's gonna start regressing back and down. And instead of regressing, I just deload. And then if I want to, I could, by the end of the deload, I'm gonna put 340 for 8, 345 for 8, 350 for 8. You see, I'm facilitating another 6 weeks of progression. That's
cool.
what deloads are for.
I think I like Chris Thibodeau's, if that's, I'm going to butcher his name. He's called Chris Thibodeau. You'll know who he is. He's like the bald guy who can snatch grip high pull like 180 kilos. He's mad strong. I like to say you can either be addicted to training or you can be addicted to gaining. And in his explanation of the deload, it's like saying in order to take 2-3 steps forward, you need to take 1 step back, and the deload is part of that. I think in the context, as we said, we have to apply context to natural hypertrophy's own training. He's had a 275 SLDL. You weigh how much less than him, and you've got far less training experience than him in terms of like years, the number of years training. You match him on SLDL. Now, I'm not saying that just because we SLDL more than him, we are more valid, or we're stronger than we're more valid. But I'm saying that if deloading was so bad, if deloading was so that mitigated volume so much that obviously it's hypertrophy, and we wouldn't be able to SLDL as much as you. We're saying with other numbers. Compare my overhead press to natural hypertrophy, and I weight at slightly more. Still, just in the context of all of our lifts, if our deloading was so disastrous to our training, it was just a week of being lazy, and we wouldn't be able to match him strength-wise, and we wouldn't be able to be increasing our tonnage. I think that he kind of contradicts himself, by the way, when he says loading should only be for powerlifters to increase their intensity, or obviously their strength. Really, his own definition of tonnage and is in strength progression. He has a huge focus on his channel on strength progression, i.e. using the deadlift, in fact, to bleed over into other movements and seriously pushing performance on that. I think that he would have progressed good with his hypertrophy training essentially if he incorporated deload week by his own standards of using strength synergistically with hypertrophy training, because the two together are closely linked. For naturals, there is very, very little difference between strength and hypertrophy. Just say about that.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I wanted to point out, yes, this thing about numbers is true. I don't even judge what he lifts for how many reps. What is more important is seeing the progression scheme of not deloading. I'm more interested in seeing how long it took him to go from 255 for 10 to 265 for 10 to 275 by 10. Because you see, I'm going to show you. I drew a picture. Right? So here's the picture. The blue line represents fitness, right? The green one represents expression, and the red one represents fatigue. You see, at the beginning of a mesocycle, all of these qualities will mostly fatigue. Fatigue is at its lowest, and as you improve fitness, as in your overall fitness, your expression goes up with your fitness. But as your fatigue rises inevitably as you increase exertion, proximity to failure, increase the weight, reps, increase sets, your fatigue goes up, up, right? But as it goes up, it has a relationship with expression where it pulls expression down. So there's a pull between fitness and fatigue, and the higher the fatigue is, the lower expression goes relative to fitness. The lower the fatigue, the lower fatigue, the higher the expression of fitness. And so maybe natural hypertrophy, the reason he's not progressing linearly like that, I don't know how he's progressing. I'm saying if he's not progressing 5 pounds for equal reps or more like that, it's possible that his fatigue is accrued so long for to such a degree that he cannot express a progression like that. It's inhibiting his ability to just linear progress. I linearly progress on basically all my lifts like that. All of them you'll see me adding 5 pounds and maybe a rep and then going up and up and up as you're making neurological adaptations, motor unit, like motor adaptations, and also muscle gain. And this is because my fatigue is lower early in the meso, and I give myself momentum to go up like this. If you're fucked up, you don't have room to do this. You're already here. Like you're basically fighting for pennies. And I don't know what his rate of progression is. My progression is fast. I don't spend time at this weight for this many reps. By a month I'm already way past there. And that's what deloads do. They let you progress faster because you have less fatigue to pull expression down. Right? And also, this comes back to deloading. If you look at this black part, this is the deload. This blue line slightly it starts trajecting downwards a little. That's because work capacity, endurance, these qualities are going down if you're not like just a little, just tiny, especially if you don't work out at all that week. But as it goes down, this slight, small linear coefficient, this tiny regression, fatigue goes down exponentially. And as fatigue goes down exponentially, expression rises back up. So as you can see from my progressions, basically after a deload, after an entire week off, and by the way, at the end of those deloads at week 6, I'm walking on, I'm like fumes. I have nothing left. I'm about to fall apart. Take a deload, I immediately PR, lifetime PR, at lower RPE. I have more reps in reserve, and I just linearly progress again. If I try to linear progress the next week, I would regress, or I'd hit the same number, or I would regress. I take a deload instead of flatlining or regressing. I don't do anything that week, and then next week I do this again. It's facilitating progression. And natural hypertrophy is a big guy about talking about the long run. We're not talking about this week, last week, next week. We're talking about the long run. And deloads facilitate progression in the long run. And the short run too. The week after you're gonna PR. Some people don't, but they have the work capacity within 2 weeks or 3 weeks to immediately surpass what they did.
Pretty spot on. Yeah.
Or maybe we'll finish the natural hypertrophy video, and that will be that. We're almost at 1 hour. I hope it's been a good video. We'll have to cut the main gaining and all that stuff into separate videos, which I prefer. It's better for everybody that way.
I used to train 7 days a week. I never had any problems and never had to deload. The injuries I got from back in those days were due to poor programming. For me, the root of all issues, the fact that you're not making gains, you're stalling, you have tendonitis somewhere, all of that is due to poor programming, which the root cause of that is volume and intensity manipulation that is subpar and a frequency manipulation that is not thought out properly. So that's going to be it for the video about deload. If you want to learn more about how to deload for strength, there are multiple powerlifting channels that can give you good.
Okay, so back to us. I just wanted to point that out. Just to make it clear. Oh, trust me. What I do is very well thought out. Very well thought out. I have all of my sessions recorded from 2020 to now. I know every PR that I've hit. I know the volumes. Like I can look at every lift individually. I also undulate, between my session 1, session 2 for legs, chest, back. So I also vary exercises day to day. Trust me, you and I know you do the same thing. We are very well thought out, methodical. I'm pretty methodical. I have planned deloads. I have reactive deloads because when I was cutting and doing 6 sets, 7 sets of quads and hamstrings per week, I realized, oh, my weight loss hasn't been that amazing, but I'm still feeling good. I can add another week instead of 6 weeks. I'll just do 7 and cut more, and then deload. That's reactive deload. And then the deload during that deload, I'm like, well, Christmas is coming, so I'm gonna cut this deload shorter than normal. I'm gonna only take 4 days off the gym. Yeah, four days off, and then another meso of aggressive cutting, and I make PRs all of those weeks too, which I'll eventually get to for the main gaining. Yeah, you see, I incorporate all of it. I'm not a robot. In the perfect world, you want proactive deloads, but in the real world, you'll have to take reactive deloads as well. And then if you were thinking prospectively, you'll also inevitably take prospective deloads. So deloads are they're not just a simple thing. Oh, I'm gonna just take a deload like this on. If I'm fucked up and I'm regressing, I'm just gonna keep going out until week 3. I'm already going backwards. I'm gonna go to week 6 and then deload. No, deload right then. That's how deloads work. They're proactive, reactive, and prospective.
Yep, quite fair. Again.
All right, and now we'll finish off with the injury prevention. It's a small point. It's very brief. I'll just just show the text from the book, and then we'll probably wrap up. So here's the text regarding injuries. Fatigue can interfere with muscle growth in a variety of ways. Well, let's say you squat 150 for 5x10 this week. You did 145 for 4x10 last week. But you're so fatigued that you can only manage 135 5x10 or 150 4x8. Each of these performances is missing the full intended progression. You see, we're trying to facilitate almost linear progression if we can. Either by weights or reps. What happens is the fatigue eventually continues to creep up next week, the week after, and so on. What happens? Eventually, you'll leave your stimulus ranges altogether and cease to make gains. And you'll start losing muscle eventually if you don't deload eventually. At some point, you'll have to bring down fatigue in order to continue to present overload and stimulate fatigue. Kind of like what I said earlier. Very fatiguing training can also interfere with growth on a molecular level by downregulating anabolic pathways. The more the training pushes to or outside of maximal recovery ability, the more AMPK is activated, which is shown to reduce mTOR activity, pathway that plays a central role in muscle growth. Cytokines, signaling proteins, are also released from stressed or damaged cells and can affect the growth machinery of nearby cells or signal similar effects in distant cells. Thus, being very sore in many of your muscles or in a few large muscles can negatively affect the growth of uninvolved muscles elsewhere in the body. On the hormonal front, cumulative fatigue seems to cause elevations in catabolic hormones like cortisol and reductions in anabolic hormones like testosterone are a recipe for anything but muscle growth. And I'm gonna actually show the injury part as well. You know, I want to show that, but I also show the injury. And then here we go. The last effect of fatigue is very serious. Injury. Injury will eventually occur if degradation exceeds regeneration for long enough. This can result in an injury that seemingly comes out of nowhere during a single set, a wear and tear injury, or long-term overuse injuries like tendonitis that develop over months and years. In any case, if a fatigue is not alleviated, you'll eventually get hurt. At that point, a morbidly comical, quote-unquote, automatic fatigue management will occur when you are physically unable to train. That's called reactive deloading. That's called reactive training. Since, quote-unquote, deload by injury is a pretty inefficient way to manage fatigue, it's imperative that we be proactive with fatigue, and that's why we have proactive deloads. See? You see, but if you have something going on, you have this inflammation, you have an injury, a serious injury, you have to reactively deload. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. In an ideal world, we would always proactively deload, or at worst case, prospectively deload. But in the real world, we have to also reactively deload, whether we like it or not, eventually. I've done it, other people have done it. So you don't want to do it, though. That's not the ideal. Some people like it. Menno Henselman is a fan of that. But you and I think we're proactive in our deloading.
Nothing more to add. I think I'd like to add a screen, my article by good old Chris on deloading to manage injury and inflammation. I'll then also show a coach called Faz Lifts. Faz is a guy who's been training for a very, very long time. He's competed in bodybuilding, powerlifting, coaches. Again, for some more practical application from coaching. And then I'll also compare all this natural hypertrophies you on deloads aren't necessary and you shouldn't deload unless you're injured, and to his own video in which he demonstrates the dip, the slingshot dips. So if I press share screen now, will you be able to see my screen and will you still be able to record? Is that good? Okay, that's good. I'm just going to go to... Okay. Still okay, cool. I'm just going to play this from Faz first.
Not okay because ultimately that bang into it. So the first thing is externals. Second thing is illness. Finding my younger clients, the ones who are more robust, you don't tend to get the aches and pains just because they're too young. So they just get ill. They get ill. They get a pick up a cold, something like that. Rather than getting an injury or a pain, they get a with some kind of cold. Immune system tends to get compromised. That's another thing to aim for, to look out for. Next thing is sleep. Sleep tends to get affected. I think this goes hand in. There's two things that go hand in hand. In my experience, sleep tends to suffer. Because sleep tends to suffer, another thing happens, which is I tend to want more junk type food. Really weird. But that's just me. I mean, you guys, you might relate to that, you might not. But I find when I sleep, it's usually because I need a deload, and so I'm generally looking for more processed types of foods, sugary, fatty, whatever. So that's another couple of signs. Now I always track my heart rate and blood pressure. It's that before I need a deload, those two markers go up ever so slightly. That's something to watch out for as well if you track those metrics. And I think, if you're a little on the older side, middle age to old, I think you should track those metrics regularly. That's another one. I think the final one for what to look out for is an actual strength decrease. I noticed this last week, which was the last sign that
I'm going to leave that there because we've already covered strength decrease. So that was Faz's opinion from experience. I actually highly recommend you check out his channel. It's actually really, really good. To also support that support Faz, this is the Chris guy I was on about. Yes, it's a teenage article. There's problems with teen, but Jim Wendler is also on teenage. It is good.
Could
Well,
you,
kind of reinforcing
for
information.
for a final video, since you have the screen share, could you look up deload roundtable? I want to bring up Eric Helms.
Yes, of course, we'll get to that. Like I said, I'm just going to cover the injury focus side from the coaches, and then of course we can move on to that. Yes, here you can see the URL at the top if you want to read about it. Increased inflammation, improved testosterone, enhanced immune system, increased muscle glycogen stores, improved mental state. This kind of goes into what Faz was saying around, always being in shape, not just in terms of your fitness, but literally the joints and connective tissue. This is actually a really, really good article. It gives information on how you can reduce stress. And then to wrap up with dealing for injury prevention from my side, I found this video interesting from Natural Hypertrophy because he shows his dips, right? And look, we're not going to get into the range of motion argument, okay? This isn't about range of motion. I can just play it. One sec. This is something. First thing is that, okay, fair enough, the range of motion. It's not just the range of motion, it's why he's using this range of motion. And secondly is the slingshot. So I looked in the comments. Pull down. Work, why do you use the slingshots? And he answers it deloads the shoulders and the chest, keeps the elbows tucked, and make a video about this for hypertrophy. But in doing this, there's also he did another dip video. I'll look it up real quick actually. It says that dips for him don't feel good in his shoulders. Now this is a problem because it goes into the sake of dealers. Obviously, there's injury prevention and reducing inflammation. I would make the strong argument that if he deloaded and took the dip out and took the slingshot out, etc., he wouldn't need to use the slingshot first of all, and he would also be pain-free. Also go into the argument that taking the deload would give him time to sub in a different exercise instead of the dip if it was just getting dry or stiff for him on his shoulders. I found the comment here somewhere. It says that he's not built from, but he says, like I said, he's using this range of motion not because it's just because he's built for it, but because going any lower and he has to use a slingshot is to prevent pain. Which, like I say, if I've done dips before and you don't do them properly or you do too much volume on them, they can cause overuse, and this is a problem.
Yeah, people are
Obviously.
so anal about tucking, and they hear this nonsense that I just don't like. Oh, you gotta tuck your shoulder, you gotta tuck your elbows, so that way you don't hurt your shoulder, blah blah, on bench and all these lifts. Look, you can move your shoulder in any direction, and possibly being too tucked increases the shoulder flexion on a dip, so your shoulder comes way forward of your hand, which is holding the weight and where you're pressing with, and that actually puts more stress on your front deltoid, ironically, which people are going to tell you, oh, that's safer. And then you're like, oh, but I feel a lot of stress on my shoulder joint and my shoulder front delt. And they're like, no, that's good. And then you flare out like a little bit like that, right? And you start benching like that, and your hand is over your shoulder, decreasing the shoulder flexion torque. They're like, oh no, that's dangerous, you're gonna destroy your shoulder. It's because people give this stupid, idiotic, like they have this myopic view of form. It's so stupid, but that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah, I'm sure if he just altered his form, his grip with grabbed possibly V shaped instead of neutral like that, he would eventually possibly find a range of motion that fits him. I don't know though about the details of this.
That could just be, it could be a tweak to the bars, or it could be, as I say, he has shoulder inflammation, and he feels this need to use the slingshot, which deloads the bottom portion, which doesn't make sense to me unless you're a powerlifter. Like I say, for hypertrophy, you want that tension on the muscle at the bottom of the dip. Not making this a range of motion arguments, taking a deload, switching out the dip, different exercise, or just taking a deload and keeping the dip to reduce the inflammation in the shoulder, and using a full range of motion, to me would make a lot of sense. I think it's ironic that he says that you should only take a deload if you're injured. Then is demonstrating an exercise which essentially he is experiencing pain in, which to me is an injury. And when you're doing half the range of motion because of pain, that to me is an injury. What do you think about that?
Well, besides range of motion itself, I would say you should pick exercises that don't cause pain, yes, and you should pick exercises that have a good stimulus for you. And I don't know if he gets a good stimulus. I would say though, this is an important point. Muscles in general are better stimulated via peak stretches and bottom portions. For example, at the bottom of a dip, when your elbow is maximally flexed, you could feel a lot of tension often in your medial head for most people, depending how you do it. Sometimes if you flare out a lot, it'll be displaced on your lateral head. And if you're doing a slingshot or accommodating resistance or anything like that, you're taking away the most efficacious portion. And yeah, there might be a use for peak contraction type movements, but I just wanted to point that out. That as a rule of thumb, you want movements that put more stretch on your muscle as hypertrophy choices. I'm not gonna tell them don't do dips. I seldom tell people don't do that. That's stupid. I'm a movement liberal. I let people do what they want. But yes, I guess that is true about if it is causing you pain, maybe you should adjust something. Yes.
Was my main segment, honestly. Just comparing his view on injuries compared to deloads. Then he seems to be doing a movement in which he's already injured in to an extent. Maybe deload could fix that. And also linked, obviously, Az and Chris, who said you could deload for your immune system, prevent injury, which natural hypertrophy didn't touch on as a method for deload. He said you should only deload when you're injured. To me is reactive and highly destructive because you have that mindset you won't be lifting long. Deload to prevent injury, deload because you're injured. But then you're already screwed.
Yes, people don't realize you feel pain and discomfort after sufficient micro trauma has accrued to the point that you can feel it. If you have a little bit teeny tiny micro trauma, you'll feel absolutely nothing. Once you have enough, you'll feel something. And you don't want to get to the point that you feel things. That's not ideal. You wanna swap movements because you realize that eventually I'll get overused if I do the same movement for like 1 year, 2 years, whatever. And if you're starting to feel pain from movements, that's telling you I've been doing this movement too long. This is why I feel pain. You shouldn't be deloading. You shouldn't be waiting for that to happen when you deload. Oh yes.
Obviously, you mentioned tracking actually just in conversation. Deload is an opportunity to reassess tracking of progress, reassess when to switch in and out exercises. If you're more experienced, you can actually switch out exercises mid-cycle, but a deload does it allow for tracking to rotate exercises. Rather than say, oh, I've been doing stiff leg deadlifts for 2 years straight now, and I'm starting to get lower back discomfort during stiff leg deadlifts. It would make more sense to wait until the deload and then reassess, and set your training maxes for, say, a SSB good morning or an RDL or some variation of SLDL, which changes strength curves.
Yeah, about tracking, I did bring that point up. It's not really brought up. When you have a start point and end point, you have segments of training. Deloads allow you to create mesocycles of fixed time, and you can look back. This is week 1. This is week 6. I can expect performance or exertions at week 1, and I can expect exertions at week 6 for retrospective analysis when I'm making, when I'm reintroducing exercises after a while. Oh, when I introduced this exercise the first time I was doing this, now I'm doing that. But also, it gives you an opportunity to say, this is when I'm going to swap exercise. What do you do if you don't deload? You say, this week I'm doing back squats, so now I'm going to start doing pause squats. Or, when you take a deload, that's the perfect opportunity. So, first off, like, milk that exercise dry as much as you can with volume, exertion, all that stuff, and then add a new exercise. It's perfect. And then this is more objective. You get to say, okay, this is me in a fresh state doing this exercise. This is me at my most adapted but also most fatigued state in the final week. And you can use that as like, to retrospectively look, to prospectively make decisions. If you're constantly fatigued and you have this dilution, this diluting your performance, you'll never know what your true performance is on an exercise because you're already fucked up when you introduced it. You already had neurological adaptations of another exercise when you introduced it. It's more measurable when you take deloads. So you can look at this time frame. This time frame, I was doing this. This time frame, I was doing that. Without deloads, when does it start and when does it end? This year, that year. Like you don't have that. You arbitrarily guess. Okay, I'm gonna look at how I did here this week, and then I'm gonna look here when I did this week, and it's like so much like noise and ambiguity. Deloads help you like formalize and structure your programming better. And if you want to be structured and objective and by the numbers, deloads help with mesocycle. You know, and mesocycles are dependent on deloads basically. How are you gonna have a mesocycle that goes 20 weeks? Doesn't happen.
This may be more nuanced for the novice audience because they would say, well, because let's be honest, most of the novice audience, they're only doing squats for their legs anyway, only doing low bar squats for their quads. So they might not understand that when you're doing leg press one week and it gets dry, and then you're doing high bar squats the next week, but they don't go very well. Is it because you are that fatigued from leg press that your high bar squats suck? Or was it because you didn't have proper loading of the high bar squat? But in the case of a deload, you could finish your leg press progression, then deload, and then if your high bar squats suck, you know it's because of inappropriate loading for the high bar squat. It wasn't because of a massive amount of fatigue from the leg press. Of course, this may be, like I say, quite nuanced to the novice lifters who are watching this because like week 1 is low bar squats, week 2 is low bar squats, week 3 is low bar squats, deload, week 1 low bar squats, week 2, and so on or whatever. But
Yeah.
like I say, as they become more advanced, you have to rotate exercises for whatever reason, and you will understand the importance of deloads to say, look, I sucked on bar squats not because I was exhausted from leg press, but because I didn't use proper loading. Just some context there.
And also for dieting, at the end of a deload or my bad, at the end of a week of cutting, the next week of deloading is maintenance. If you don't deload, when do you decide to go from cutting to maintenance to surplus? Now I know he has some viewpoints on bulking and cutting, which are in a different episode. Can't talk about that now. But yes, when you deload, this is the perfect time to shift gears. Either when you deload, you're gonna eat maintenance or surplus no matter what. Even if you're cutting, you're not gonna be cutting in a deload. You're gonna be at maintenance, and this is the perfect time for a cut. This is this point right here with a cut. Let me time it. I haven't been keeping track, but now I am. So with cutting, when you're cutting, you can't like if you keep cutting week after week, you're gonna have diet fatigue. But if you take 1 week of deloading, just like lifting, your diet fatigue drops if you eat at maintenance or even a tiny surplus, and then you have more momentum, more energy, psychological, like hunger wise, to keep cutting for another 6 weeks or whatever. That's what I did. I took 4 days of maintenance calories, and that gave me enough room just to cut for another 4.5 weeks. And I cut really hard. I was starting to get hungry before the deload though, and after those 4 days of not cutting at all, I felt reborn. That's not just psychological. Hunger is like ghrelin, leptin, this and that, and also psychological. And if you can mitigate hunger as long as you can, your cuts are going to be more successful, and you're probably going to lose less muscle because on maintenance you're not losing muscle, or surplus you're not losing muscle either. So yeah, deloading is like the perfect time to make that transition. Full cut, surplus, full cut, maintenance, whatever.
Nothing much out there, mate.
Like we've said many things. Like I said before, I could drone on and on forever about why deloads and you know this objective segmenting of mesocycles with the deloads in between them is like so great. It gives you something to measure too. I tell you, oh, I rotate exercises generally every 2 mesocycles. That's my default. And if I like an exercise a lot, I'll do 3 mesocycles. If it sucks, I'll just do it 1. How do you translate this, or how do you express this without mesocycles, without deloads to segment? Deloads segment mesocycles. That's how they're segmented.
Still agree with that. Now I rotate. I don't rotate as much as you. I don't think. I don't do, but yeah.
I mean, some exercises, especially smaller ones, like well, actually I rotate those too, but like with smaller ones, it's less risky with like a wrist curl. You could do the same wrist curl for months and months. Don't worry about overuse. Like sets of 15, like a top set of 15 on a kilo wrist curl won't give you this awful injury that's going to knock you out of the gym or this overuse. But for a stiff leg deadlift, I could keep doing RDLs. I PR'd, like I was PRing during my cut. I could keep doing them for this bulk. I haven't decided. Saturday I could reintroduce it, but why? I could just swap to a different variation of hip hinge. I'll make the same, like I'll use less weight, which is always great for bodybuilding, less injury risk, and progress on that instead of risking, oh, I'm going to get stronger. Well, why do we care about getting stronger continuously? Swap exercises before you get overused. That's my rule of thumb.
Are there any final points you want to make? I think we've gone into quite some detail on each point.
No, I think we can close it here, and I'm going to close it out with Eric Helms talking, and then I'm going to end the video.
Yeah.
I'm going to show him explaining reactive, proactive between Menno Henselman and Mike Israel. He's the man in the middle. Menno Henselman is all about reactive deloading. Mike Israel is all about proactive deloading. And Eric Helms gives an opinion that's like in between both. And I'm also going to have to timestamp this. I'm going to have to go back eventually.
Yep.
But are we going to do main gaining next?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, that one's fun. I have a stronger bone to pick with main gaining than I do with delos, which I definitely have a bone to pick because delos are the shit, man. Like, yeah, but here I'm gonna show Eric Helms talking about this, and then we're gonna just finish this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Gravity Training, signing out. ProphetFear, signing out for this episode. Oh, but Eric Helms talk. I will catch you later.
It's painful to listen to these two guys talk for so long, but it's happened, and we're here, and we're not better for it. But I'm going to try to recover that a little bit. No. Overall, I agree with both these guys. I think I'll address Menno first because he first spoke. In some ways, I agree with Menno. In some ways, I don't. I think, for one, while hypertrophy and the adaptation that we're trying to get for physique athletes getting bigger is a local process, just because the adaptation is local doesn't mean the training only affects local systems. The training we do to grow is affecting the entire complex system. So in that way, I agree with Mike that you need to look at the bigger picture in terms of recovery, and that there might be joint, nervous system, and probably more importantly, just psychological issues. I think a really good read for anyone listening is some of the periodization reviews written by John Keeley. John Keeley is a theorist who I really like because he always just comes in every 5 years and just kicks everyone in the ass and says, "You're so dumb. Everything you're based on is based on, stuff that we discarded in real science in the 50s, basically." And he discusses how we often look at stress and adaptation as these kind of very binary things. You input X, and then if you get a certain amount of recovery, you get Y. And in reality, it is much more complex than that. It's our perception of it and everything else in our life. Like Menno said, your partner breaks up with you, and that's going to affect, how you recover from training. And it's, while it's nice to be able to program a certain amount of training load and then go, right, we need X amount of recovery, and that should sort it. It just never plays out that way in real life. So in that way, I agree with Menno that you do need a reactive or an auto-regulated approach to recovery from training. However, as a practitioner and an educator, I have a different approach to what I tell people. If I'm going to put something in a book that is going to be mass consumed by
10,000 plus people who I don't have an active hand in modifying their training, you better believe I'm going to tell them they need to do planned deloads, because especially the cultural way that we operate as bodybuilders is typically, even when we might say more is not better, we operate with kind of that intrinsic core belief that if I could just work harder, I'd be better. And by the way, I also kind of like pain a little bit, and I'm a little crazy, and I just want to go hard and go home. I don't care what all the science I'm saying. I just want to go hard and go home. That's basically what's really going on in kind of like the reptile brain of most bodybuilders. So that means that when I write a book, or if I'm talking on a podcast, I'm going to say, it's probably not a bad idea if you don't have a coach who's overseeing your training to take regularly planned deloads. Now, that said, when I'm actually working with an athlete directly, I pencil in deloads based on where I think they should need it based on the program I've written. And then it gets modified quite frequently because just like Menno said, stuff happens. People break up with you, you get in traffic, you learn that a political candidate got elected who you don't like, you need to find, a safe space. All kinds of things can destroy your ability to adapt to training. So I think it's important to be able to modify them as a coach. I think it's also important to realize that your deload strategy should be related to your training strategy. And one thing that I don't think was well addressed was that a lot of what we're talking about is recovery from what just happened. And I think a lot of the times what we need to also be thinking about is preparation for what's to come. So while it is true that you might recover your performance acutely in 24, 48, 72, or 96 hours, if you're going into a higher volume mesocycle, you need to prepare yourself for that. And if you just jump in right out of the gates in week 1 and start doing high volume, you're going to accumulate so much damage to prevent your ability to adapt and perform on that newer high volume or higher intensity or just higher overload is probably a better way to generalize it program. So I think a deload between mesocycles is also quite useful in that you can use it as a preparatory period to elicit the repeated bout effect so you can handle the higher levels of training volume and intensity and overload that's coming in the new mesocycle. And I would also finally say, the last thing I want to add is that your ability to recover changes depending on the quality you're talking about, even in performance. So there was a study by Faria that came out just last year that showed in response to a high volume resistance training program, strength came back earlier before your ability to produce volume. So a single isolated AMRAP is not necessarily predictive of your overall ability to produce work, which I think is a pretty important thing for a bodybuilder, obviously. So, and that may be different if you had done a fatiguing high intensity protocol and then to see what performance came back. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things going on at the same time. Different performance recovers at different rates. Not only do deloads help you recover from what just occurred, but can help you to prepare what we call an intro cycle for the next mesocycle. And finally, I would agree there is a time and a place for a planned or penciled in auto-regulated deload, and it really depends on who you're talking to. And I think it's important to realize that if you don't have a coach, you really shouldn't trust yourself unless you're a pretty damn experienced lifter.
Brilliant.